Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegran, that's G-R-A-N, group, at edinarealty.com, or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners.
On this episode, David and Dan recap the Twins' 3-game series against the Baltimore Orioles. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. The Twins head to Baltimore. Gonna be a tough matchup, but they get swept, Dan. 0-3, and none of it was good baseball, Dan.
You know, I remember doing a pre-season preview episode, and somebody on this podcast said that he didn't think the Orioles were very good. Was that you who said that?
Okay, well, first of all, if you're using the Baltimore Orioles beating the Twins as the justification for them being good, I hope you have more proof than that, because that Dan, does not a good team make.
So the Twins are now 6-11, which isn't great, I would argue. But you know what? There's a lot of baseball left, David. This has the feel of a team that's going to have to come surging back in August. Because it's going to be a long time, I think, until they're in first place, if at all.
Well, if at all. Dan, where's the hope? Where's the optimism? You're supposed to be Mr. Brightside on the podcast.
All right, I think it's late enough now we can talk about standings. So the Guardians are 12-5, the Royals 12-6, the Tigers 10-8, Twins 6-11, the White Sox are 2-15, and the Twins have some games coming up against them, so I'm pretty sure they're not going to be last, but I do think it's going to take a little time to pass these teams here, just given how shorthanded the Twins are right now.
Well, I have a question, though. What's Baltimore's record?
Well, Baltimore's record is 12-6.
Okay, that's not like this insane juggernaut. Like, you didn't even respond to my critique that you saying they're a good team because they beat the Twins. You just skipped right over, and you're like, yeah, the Twins are bad. Like, but the
Orioles are good. But they've scored 104 runs. They're a plus 27 in the run differential. That's a good baseball team. They have like the most runs in the AL, and they're like 5th or 6th overall. I think this is a pretty good baseball team.
Well, Dan, half of those runs were scored against Twins pitchers who insist on throwing meatballs right down the middle on 1-2 counts. So I don't know how much you can really use that as a factor.
Well, I'm just saying, yes, it's early on. It's still April 17th. I just think it's hard to pass 3 teams in the standings. The Orioles, I think, are pretty good. They have a track record from last year we can look at, and the Twins don't have anybody healthy to play, and there's nobody in AAA to call up because they're all hurt too.
You keep skipping, Dan. I don't understand. Are we talking about the Orioles? Are we talking about the Twins? Are we talking about how good the Orioles are or how bad the Twins are?
It's both.
Okay, enough of this back and forth. Who's on first, Abbott and Costello bit, Dan. Let's go into the series recap.
Series recap.
Game 1, Dan. It's ugly. It's bad. Nobody wants to watch it. Twins start 0-2 hole after the first inning, which seems to be just a trademark of this team. They love getting down early. Twins end up losing this one 7-4, but it never felt like a 3-1 deficit, Dan. It always felt like about a 30-40 run deficit.
Yeah, the bright spot maybe is the second inning where Jose Miranda hits his first home run of the Twins season. So that at least was good. But then, as you said, the Orioles answered with 2 runs in the third. The Twins get 1 in the fourth, and you can't be trading 2 for 1 the whole game. And it's 7-2 going into the last 3 innings, and the Twins just really didn't have it.
Well, and here's the issue, Dan. Louis Varland, 5 innings pitched, 11 hits, 4 earned runs. Two runs that were scored that weren't earned were because of an Eddie Julian error in the first inning that he booted a ball that should have been a double play, but instead it leads to 2 runs for the Orioles. But here's the thing, Dan, about Louis Varland. I said it on Twitter, and some people didn't like it, but it makes way more sense for this team to ship Louis Varland back to AAA and let SWR make another start.
That's Simeon Woods Richardson you're referring to, I believe, the spot starter who came up for the doubleheader, and he did look really good. But I've seen also on X and other places people saying, well, it's too early to pull the plug on Varland, but I'm sorry. He's proven to be an effective reliever, and I know that the Twins don't have the space for him at the moment right now in their relief pen, but come on. I mean, SWR looked a whole lot better. Why not give him another chance? It's not too early. This team they're 5 games under 500 already.
You need something. And I guess here's my question. Today, Dan, in Game 3, would you have rather had Okert out there or Varland out of the pen?
That's because he can flamethrow. He can throw 100 miles an hour at that point. One other point about that, they sent Jorge Alcala down, and I heard on the pregame radio for, I think it was Game 2, or maybe it was on the TV. It was one of these spots. And they said part of the calculation for sending him down was that the Orioles have so many great left-handed hitters, and so Rocco wanted to keep up a lefty instead of, say, sending down Cody Funderburk. But it didn't matter because the starters were no good in this series, really. I should say in games 1 and game 2. Varland and Paddack were no good.
No, not good at all. We should mention in game 1, again, like you said, bright spot, Jose Miranda. He started his first game. Was in Baltimore, actually. And you know who else had their first MLB start was Kyle Farmer. And his first MLB hit came in extra innings, a double down the line. Isn't that kind of fun?
Well, in the top of the first of this game, Farmer was robbed of a hit and an RBI by a diving catch by Mullins, who factored in on the last play of this series as well. But yeah, a couple of the things about this game. Orioles hit 3 home runs. These guys can slug. They lead wire to wire. Varland goes 5 innings, but 11 hits. I think that's also what kind of makes those. Yeah, 2 of those runs were unearned, but still 6 runs, 4 earned, and just 4 strikeouts. Too many pitches in the zone with 2 strikes. I think that's something you're going to bring up a little bit later. A couple costly grounded to double plays from the Twins. They leave 5 on base, 2 for 9 with runners in scoring position. It just doesn't feel, though, that this Twins team is going to score 8 runs in a game very often.
Dan, it doesn't feel like they're going to score 2 runs very often.
Well, fair point. Matt Bowman makes his Twins debut. He looks pretty good in relief. 3 innings pitched. The 1 run on a home run by Henderson, 2 strikeouts. And I think with that, we can look to game 2, which had a pretty similar feel to game 1.
It could have been the same game, Dan. It didn't even matter. You could have played the same game on replay and told me this is what happened in game 2, and I would have said, that's pretty similar to game 1. Doesn't matter, Dan. The results are virtually the same. The Orioles win this one 11-3, and it all comes down to the starting pitching for the Twins in this instance. Paddack, how do you say his nickname, Dan? I always have struggle with that word.
The Sheriff, David.
It's a hard word for me to say, Dan. But anyway, he goes 5 1/3, which you'll talk about later. Rocco just, leaving him out there to hang. But he puts up 9 earned runs, Dan. 2 home runs, 2 strikeouts, and a walk. A rough outing for the returned from injury Chris Paddack from last season.
Yeah, Caleb Thielbar and Jay Jackson finish it out to save the bullpen some, which ends up, not actually working out great in game 3 either. But the Twins are already down 7-0 in the third. Buxton did triple in a run. He looked pretty good, actually, in this series overall. Looked, a lot more like himself in so much as he can. But they just needed a little bit more offense.
Yeah, a little more offense would have gone a long way. And let me tell you, Dan, I was mounting our TV on the wall during this game because we got a new TV. It's a whole thing. Anyway, my wife is very excited to reorganize the living room. And so I'm mounting this TV on the wall, and the Twins were down, 7-1 or something at one point. And I was like, I need to put the brackets on the TV. And I'm thinking, I don't think I'll get electrocuted, but I should shut the TV off. I didn't even bother turning the small TV onto the game. I'm like, you know what? I can probably miss a half inning here. I don't think I'm going to miss that much. You
didn't miss that much. The Twins do add, they add a run in the 6th, they add a run in the 9th, but gosh, when it's 11-2, what's the difference? And here's the thing, you look down the Orioles lineup here. I mean, you see Henderson 3 for 5, Rushman 1 for 4, O'Hearn 2 for 5, Santander 2 for 4, Mullins 1 for 5, Cowser 2 for 4. I mean, it's not quite a murderer's row. I don't think we can call. Well, I guess because a group of crows is a murder of crows, right? What's a group of Orioles?
Ogres are like onions.
That was, the thing is, it's not even like a metaphor because you're just talking about 2 different types of birds that what their group is called. But I still think you deserved the sounder there, Dan.
Just looking up what a group of Orioles is called. Oh, here we go.
This is going to make great radio here.
Hold on, I'm going to find it. Oh, man. All right. Control F, Oriole.
Oh, my God. We're still doing this?
All right, we'll move on. I would, if any listeners know what a group of Orioles is called specifically, but I'm going to go with a murder of Orioles. I think that sounds good enough. We'll talk about Buxton's highlight catch in center a little bit later. Well, then there's game 3, which was a better baseball game. This is a 4-2 loss for the Twins, but it is a good baseball game for a good stretch of this.
If by good baseball game you mean a close baseball game.
Yes, that's what I mean.
But good baseball game is probably a bit of a stretch. The Orioles call up a AAA starter, Dan, to make a spot start against the Twins because they were like, you know what? They're not going to do much damage no matter who we put on the mound. I think in consideration, Dan, they thought about using a position player. They're like, Holiday is still figuring it out at second base. Why not give him a chance on the mound? If you're going to take a guy from AAA and you want to make him look like a Cy Young candidate, put him up against this Twins lineup, Dan. I think you would look good on that mound right now, Dan, pitching against this Twins team.
That assumes I could get the ball from the mound to home plate.
You don't even have to. Have you seen some of these guys are swinging at balls that are nowhere near home plate, Dan?
Those sweepers are tricky, David. They look like they're coming right down the middle, and then they just go veering right off the side. No, I mean, Pablo does look pretty good here. He goes 6 innings, 1 earned run, just 2 hits, 7 strikeouts. The 1 run was on a home run. It was just a shame that when the Twins do finally take a lead in the 7th inning, they can't hold it.
Nope, couldn't be done, Dan. Okert comes in, and again, this is one of those times when you're missing guys like Duran and Topa. I mean, Thielbar pitched yesterday, so it was unlikely that he was going to come out of the pen for the 7th inning. So Okert's your guy. And so far, Dan, Okert has struggled when he's been given an opportunity in big spots.
And with other guys coming off the injury list pretty soon, you mentioned Duran, you mentioned Topa. I mean, maybe he's going to be the odd man out, at least if Funderburk can prove himself to be a little bit more effective. But Caleb Thielbar also needs to prove himself to be a little bit more effective. There's some lefty issues going on in this bullpen right now.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun, though, to see Brock Stewart come in bottom 7th and clean up Okert's mess. Gets a big strikeout here on a high fastball just outside the zone. Another quick note here, a great diving catch by Martin in center field. There was a note on that Mullins catch in game 1 that we talked about that he robbed Farmer of the hit, that some guys were saying that Buxton would have made that catch, but it wouldn't have looked spectacular because he would have made it standing up.
That's probably true. I think a lot of that happens with outfield catches, right? Alex Kirilloff is going to have to dive for some balls that maybe Max Kepler can just kind of get to.
We don't get to use that sounder when Max isn't here, Dan. It makes me so sad.
Finding a way, which is a good segue. He is going to start running the bases here, and hopefully he can come back soon, too, because goodness knows the Twins could use somebody who has a decent track record of being up at the plate and getting some hits.
That would be nice. So, yeah, this one ends, folks. Bottom 9, Mullins walks it off with a 2-run home run to right. Absolutely heartbreaking. I really thought the Twins could have come away with the victory here. Let's be done talking about these games, Dan. Let's go ahead and push forward into Puckett's Picks winner.
Catch 'em all, Kirby Puckett! Puckett's Picks winner.
All right, so the listeners pick up their first win here of the season. They take Jeffers, who has 8. David picked Kirilloff, who had 2. I picked Buxton, who had 2. Hogs picked Martin. He stuck with his hot hand, but Martin only had the 1. So the listeners now have a win. They did not get the half-point bonus because Jose Miranda was actually the team winner with 10 points.
I am not throwing away my shot.
So, David, how about you give them the season standings?
Yeah, season standings here are sad, Dan. Hogs is in the lead with 2.5. I'm in second with 2. You're in third with 1.5. And now the listeners are finally on the board with a victory. 1 point for the listeners.
All right, let's go on here. Beast versus Bench.
Beast versus Bench.
Is losing fun? Is losing fun?
I have to go with Miranda. The guy looked pretty good.
I am not throwing away my shot.
He goes 3 for 4 in the first game, 1 for 4 in the second game. And in game 3, he gets a hit as well. He's 1 for 4. He was the only guy who was consistent. So that OPS of 773 looks a whole lot better. They have got to have him playing well during the stretch.
It's pretty crazy. I mean, I think that we saw so much of his breakout year and we just looked at him with just this really glowing optimism. And then with all of the injury struggles, it's so hard for a guy like that because in the mind of a fan now, that guy didn't pan out, right? Like we've all sort of moved on because it's like, what have you done for me lately? We're really good at playing the long game as a fan base, Dan, as you can tell, as we're like 16 games into the season and basically saying to write it off and become Yankee fans. But
nobody's saying that. Nobody's going that far.
That would never happen. I don't know. We'd probably be Cubs fans, maybe. I don't know if I could stay in the AL. Maybe the Royals. I don't know. They're pretty inoffensive.
The Reds. Anyway, everybody can root for the Reds, David.
The Reds. Let's do it. Absolutely. De La Cruz. Let's do it. Anyway, so that being said, I do think that him playing well is a welcomed surprise. And it probably shouldn't be. Like if you've just been watching him grow and develop and return to form after coming back from injury. But my goodness, Dan, every time I see him up, I'm just expecting a strikeout or a pop out. And now he's making contact, and I love it.
If only Matt Wallner could have figured this out a little bit too. We'll see. Maybe he's going to have the same trajectory, and next year he'll be competent again.
Could be, Dan. I'm going to go with Pablo Lopez because he brought some stability to this team, Dan, for game 3. He gave them every opportunity to win. One mistake, but otherwise flawless. Again, the mistake was on a 1-2 count. I don't understand it, Dan. I do not understand our pitchers and their mindset here. But my goodness, Pablo Lopez, it's nice to see that sort of rain delay start against the Tigers was just that. It was a fluke. There was no real reason to get concerned about that.
I think there are 3 guys right now in this rotation that I feel pretty good about. It's Bailey Ober, it's Joe Ryan, and it's Pablo Lopez. But on my bench, I'm going to go with one of the 2 other guys, and I'm going to go with Louis Varland right now. He wanted this shot. He didn't want to be a bullpen guy, and he's just not making the most of it. And I'll point again to the 11 hits that he gave up. His ERA is up to 8.36, and that's even with just 4 earned runs in this start. Now, he gave him 5 innings, but 94 pitches. He's being inefficient. He's not getting as many strikeouts as he would need, and there's just, frankly, too much contact against him.
Yeah, you got to be outside of the zone more than he is. Like, I understand you want to skirt the zone and you want close pitches, but you can't be giving these guys opportunities to swing at pitches that are middle.
Who's yours?
I got to go with Julian, man. It's driving me nuts.
Oh, Canada.
1 for 11 with 5 strikeouts. He's not a guy who needs to be striking out. He needs to be taking walks, Dan. Each series, I want to see that strike to walk ratio to be even at worst, right? He's going to lead off a lot of games. He should be seeing a lot of pitches, but you got to swing at the good ones, Dan. And I thought he sort of had that breakout that, somebody on the Dodgers had said something negative against Canada, but that's not the case, Dan. Obviously, Julian needs some sort of catalyst to swing at those pitches that are close when it's a full count.
It makes me miss Luis Arise and his ability to just kind of foul pitches off when they were close. Eddie Julian hasn't shown that ability right now. He's being too picky, and I think he's even recognizing it. Like, he's not happy with his approach. Obviously, it's not working, but you can't be letting fastballs zip right by you. That suggests that you're guessing, and we don't want him to be guessing.
No, you're a Major League Baseball player for a reason, and even though the best only get a hit a third of the time, Dan, there's still some skill involved here. You're not just closing your eyes and swinging.
All right, well, I got more things to say about the pitching staff here in Rocco's Rewind.
Rocco's Rewind.
Chris Paddack recognized that he needed to eat some innings, and I love a good inning eater, right? And so he fell on his proverbial sword here. He got them into the 6th inning. Now, the guy gave up 9 earned runs, and his ERA actually is also 8.36, with matching Louis Varland right now, go figure. But 12 hits, just 2 strikeouts, and 1 walk. And I got to think, I guess I'm complimenting Rocco for just riding that out. But if there was ever a white flag, it was leaving Chris Paddack in that 3rd inning when the Orioles put up 4 against him to make it 7-0.
You had a great opportunity, Dan, for a great metaphor. You could have said instead of falling on his sword, you could have said he fell on his 6-shooter. Like, come on, it's the whole, he has a weapon built into the nickname. They don't call him the Knight. They don't call him the King. They call him whatever they call him. But he carries a 6-shooter.
Ogres are like onions. End of story.
I'm sticking with it, David. I'm sticking with the sword. But yes,
I just
you're
can't
right.
believe I'm having to make your bad puns and metaphors for you, Dan. That's not the role I'm playing here.
That's probably not. What is your Rocco's? You have a quote written in.
I can't believe I saw this as a quote and I thought it was pretend. I thought it was a satire. I thought it was an Onion article that like Rocco Baldelli was interviewed by the Onion. Rocco is quoted as saying, "It feels like we're behind a lot." Yeah, Rocco, it probably does feel that way. Do you know why it feels that way, Rocco? Because you are behind a lot. Like, it's not a feeling. That's an objective. That's not a subjective feeling. Like, man, it just really feels. No, baseball is a statistically driven sport nowadays, Dan. Sabermetrics, you know what they don't have a stat for, Dan? How often it feels like you're playing from behind. They have real numbers, Dan, that can show you that, hey, Rocco, you just lost 11-3. Do you think it felt a couple of times like you were playing from behind, or was that a surprise to you? Like, why does it feel like we're losing? That can't be right.
Fans want an ejection. There it goes. And that was Gardy's gripe.
I understand we have this list of players' body parts that we keep in order. We should keep an eye on Rocco's brain. That should be one we should follow to make sure it exists, Dan. Every other interview, just have him do a couple of cognitive tests to make sure he understands what's happening on the baseball diamond. Not, it feels like we're behind. Win a couple baseball games, Rocco, and I promise that feeling will go away.
It's a little sarcastic here at the Twins manager after only 17 games, David. I think I'm going to give him
17 terrible games, Dan. They just got swept by the Orioles, a team of a bunch of white guys who all look the same. You would think it was the hockey team from Russia, Dan. My goodness.
If we play them 10 times, they might win 9. But not.
Did you see their shortstop tried to grow a mustache just to look different in their team roster photos?
Is that why you've grown like a little goatee, David, so that we can tell us apart here on the podcast?
No, it's because I'm depressed, so I haven't been shaving, Dan, because this stupid baseball team won't win a friggin' baseball game.
Oh, goodness. Well, it's time to move on here to cheer your times here, the Minnesota Moment.
Minnesota Moment.
I'm so worked up, Dan, I couldn't even find the button. I'm looking all over the place trying to hit the sounder button. And no, this isn't a cheerier time. I want to talk about Pablo and Jax basically losing Game 3 by throwing meatballs on a 1-2 count in Game 3. Do you want to know, Dan? Do you want to know the results of 1-2 pitches that led to scoring for the Baltimore Orioles? There was a double hit with a 1-2 count. There was a home run hit with a 1-2 count. There was a double hit with a 1-2 count. There was a single hit with a 2-2 count. Different, but pretty much the same. Then there's a home run hit with a 2-2 count. Again, different, but pretty much the same. If you have 2 strikes on a hitter and they don't have 3 balls, you do not have to throw a ball in the strike zone, Dan. That does not need to happen. That has never needed to happen in the history of baseball. If you saw a guy in the 70s with a 1-2 count throwing a ball like these Twins pitchers are hitting, they would be set on fire, Dan. They wouldn't just be sent down. They would just be set on fire.
I can't compete with you physically, and you're no match for my brains.
If only you were in that room with Rocco and with Pete Mackey. I don't know why they're not asking you these questions, David, because you make a fair point. I mean, there's a difference between trying to use the elements of surprise and sliding a fastball down the middle of the plate and actually locating your pitches in the corner where they can't hit them, right? And that's what I think the Orioles pitchers could do pretty well, is they could use deception. They could hit the corners. And for the most part, the Twins just made too many mistakes. And you can't make those mistakes against a lineup like the Orioles. They're too good.
And too Russian, from what we've discussed, Dan. I'm trying to come down. I'm trying to calm down. It's been a stressful day. I'm not happy with this baseball team. Can you cheer me up a little bit, Dan? Give me a good Minnesota moment.
I can. So Byron Buxton in the bottom of the 6th inning of Game 2 goes back to center. And I'm kind of a couple outcomes here so that I'm okay with. I'm okay with that being a home run, right? The game is already out of reach. That's fine. If Byron goes back and he looks up and the ball goes over the wall, whatever. And I'm okay with Byron Buxton making a comfortable catch, right? Leaning back, reaching up, putting his hand up there. You know, it's like the Sandlot, like just put your hand up and I'll hit it, right? What I'm not okay with is what Byron Buxton did, and that's try to make a great catch, because it scares me every time that he goes up there, right? And he turned his body and it was great, but I'm literally not cheering when he makes that catch because I'm worried about the landing. I'm watching, and the camera lingers, right? The camera doesn't leave Byron because it knows that something still could happen here in these moments. Byron could clutch his knee, he could wince, and he did none of those things. And he just actually made a great catch, and it was fantastic, and it was wonderful, but it was everything about Byron Buxton kind of wrapped up into one moment because the worry almost overwhelms the joy.
I'm not dead.
You're just waiting for Buxton to put his hand up to say, I'm not dead. All is well. All of my limbs are intact. I have no concussion symptoms. Let's keep playing baseball.
All right, David. Well, speaking of playing baseball, let's go in here to Maurer's Musings.
I just don't know how it can get any better.
Maurer's Musings.
I think we're both looking forward to happier times because there's a stretch here, David, where the Twins are going to play a few teams that I think they should be able to beat. They're playing the Tigers, the White Sox, the Angels, the White Sox, and then the Red Sox. Those are their next 5 series. And so my question to you, David, is can this team over this stretch get back to 500?
If they can't, I don't know that they ever will. Even with the pieces that they're missing, you should be able to put some wins together against a team that only has 2 victories, Dan. The White Sox have 2 victories. You should be able to get back to 500. And I'm not asking you to sweep the next 4 series. That's not realistic. But my goodness, on Pablo's starts, on Ober's starts, those are starts that you should be able to come away with a victory, even if you're only scoring 3 or 4 runs. But you have to find a way to get it done because, it's early in the season. Nobody's denying that. However, this is a very easy stretch of series that you need to do very well on in order for it to impact the record at the end of the season.
Yeah, of those teams that I named there, the Tigers are the only one with a winning record at 10-8. And the others are just at or below 500. So this is your chance, but then you're down some of your best players. You don't have Carlos Correa. You don't have Royce Lewis. You don't even have Brooks Lee to call up and take over this space. So I don't know. I think that it is going to say a lot about this team, the performance that they will have over this next 16-game stretch.
So with that note, Dan, it is important to note that Duran threw a bullpen and he's going to face live pitching on Friday. But my question to you, Dan, here, if you could choose one of them to be back in the lineup on Friday, are you taking Royce or are you taking Carlos?
I have to take Carlos Correa. He's more proven. He's a shortstop, which is a more crucial position and a little less harder to replace, though we've seen some questionable play at third from Kyle Farmer and Willie Castro and Jose Miranda. So I would rather have Correa back. He's the leader of this team, and it's hard to say. Royce is the spirit of the team in many ways, but Carlos is the engine of the team.
Well, let's grade this terrible, terrible series.
Series grades.
Let me go first. Because
as you're going to go first
in the last episode. Yeah. Well, no, I always go first because I want to get comfortable for your long, drawn out session. Yeah. I love that Hogue said that he actually stops and leans back in his chair waiting for your descriptions and your grading, Dan. I'm going to give him an F, obviously. This would have actually been a B- if they managed to win the last game because, again, you're on the back end of your rotation. You got no help from Paddack or from Varland. But when you get a good start from your starter, especially as good a start as Pablo made, you have to capitalize. It's it's an F. Win one of these baseball games, for crying out loud.
I mean, the Orioles only had one at bat with runners in scoring position in game 3, and they still were able to win it through the long ball. So that's a legit one. I'm going to go with my 2 categories. So the advanced retreat, I gave this a 2 out of 10. The bullpen took a step back. The starting rotation, as you pointed out, didn't look great when it didn't even look like you would want or expect a 4th and a 5th starter to look. And then also just the lineup, aside from Miranda and Buxton, didn't have a lot of oomph. And so I went with a 2 out of 10 there. As far as well-played baseball, I gave him a 4 out of 10. I kind of was looking at 3 things here. So fielding, there was that crucial error you talked about with Julian. Plays in the clutch. They didn't have a lot of hits in big moments. They were 2 for 9 with runners in scoring position in game 1, 2 for 10 in game 2, and then 1 for 6 in game 3. And that's better than the stretch we've seen before, but there wasn't enough there. And then just any other smart base running plays, and they just didn't have a lot of opportunities to make really great plays otherwise. So you total that together, that's 6 out of 20. You cut it in half, it's 3 out of 10, and then that is an F. It's not that hard. You teased me for my math. I can totally reduce fractions. I just did. That's why I did that.
I knew that you'd bring that up. I thought in my head, I'm like, I'm going to tease him about this, and he's going to make a point to reduce the fraction in the next episode.
Can I point out something about my childhood, David? My very lonely childhood. After you hear the story, it's going to feel that way. So I would simulate baseball games using dice, right? Every combination of 3 dice rolled had an outcome, right? And then I would fill in, like if you're keeping score at a baseball game, like I would fill in the square, and then obviously, a single if a guy's on first, then you have to decide whether he's going to get to third or not. And so I had sheets of whole season-long stats that were all simulated, David. I know how to do fractions. I can do a lot of things with math. Fractions is the easy part.
Yeah, I mean, if any of you want to know how Dan and I met, he was actually in the woods, and I ran into him, and he was frightened to see another human. It was a very touching moment, and a long friendship has blossomed from that moment.
Anyway, yes, so we agree on an F. We haven't been able to give A's. I don't think this whole season. They've never put together a series yet.
Yeah, hopefully that will change over the course of these next series against very bad baseball teams, Dan. And so I hope the Twins can prove themselves not to be a very bad baseball team. But we will have to wait and see. Let's move forward. Herbie's headlines.
I don't know, Jack. It looked like Herbeck pulled him off the bag.
Herbie's headlines.
So I know you guys discussed this without me last episode, but with the new news about Shohei Ohtani and his translator, Ippei, who was apparently siphoning money from him for years. And I wanted to double back because we recorded right before the news broke, kind of 2 series ago. And I think we looked at it and said, something's fishy here. Shohei must be guilty. But then we actually read the whole federal investigation and the reports on that. And this is a case of where the simple solution was not the right one, right? I mean, what a crazy, contorted, backward, really kind of sad situation that this really became for all parties involved. And I think, and again, gambling in sports, this is a problem. Ippei's not going to be the only person. He's clearly not the only person in the world who's dealing with these massive gambling debts. And I'm just so tired of seeing, I try to even avoid going to ESPN now because it's so laden with betting and it's so heavy on, it's like the stock market now where you're kind of you're betting on what you think might happen, not just who's going to win or anything like that. It's just, and I don't like that. I think that that's dangerous. And I think when the coverage becomes about betting and not about the actual play on the field, that's what's bothering me. It's bothered me about fantasy football for a long time now, but to see that happening to baseball, I think is really troubling, and I think it takes away from the game. I think this is a very short-sighted view that baseball is taking here.
I was actually surprised that Hogs was pretty anti-betting, knowing how active he is in betting. And so it's sort of a nuanced take that you need to be able, I wouldn't even say he's hypocritical, right? Because he's not saying that sports betting is bad. What he's saying is the way that sports betting is being implemented is bad. But so I think your take was just as good. And so I think it's important that we do speak to this so that people understand that betting can be a problem in a lot of different ways, but there are okay ways to bet. You shouldn't be taking out a second mortgage to put a bet on the Twins to win. Well, first of all, that's a bad bet. But you shouldn't be doing it even if it's a good bet here. Gambling needs to be understood within the bounds of entertainment and not within the bounds of I'm going to make money doing this. And I guess there's exceptions to every rule. Sure. Professional poker players who know what they're doing and whatnot. But like, we need to be careful. We need to make sure the athletes are protected. And because, I mean, athletes could get in just as much trouble, if not more so, than fans who maybe lose everything through this sort of betting.
And I think we're going to see that. I don't think it's going to take very long. We saw this in basketball. There was an NBA player who was suspended, I think, for life from the NBA today. So I think that is going to come up and it's going to rear its head. I did want to mention one other thing around baseball. David, the Astros are 6-14. And I bring this up because I want to say there's hope for this Twins team, right? If the Astros can be 6-14, and we know they're going to turn it around.
Maybe. I mean, maybe. I hope not. I hope the Twins do and the Astros don't. But that has not historically been the case, Dan.
All right, let's go on here to Puckett's picks for this Tigers series this weekend in Minnesota.
And we'll see you tomorrow night. Puckett's Picks.
Well, the listeners always get to pick first, Dan. And in this instance, they won and they get to pick first. So I wonder if they should get to take two players. Is that how it works? But
not how it works.
No. So they're going to take Jeffers, which is not a bad pick. Obviously, he's been honestly the most productive and consistent offensive performer on this team. Hogs is going to take Buxton because he's a homer. That's what homers do. They take Byron Buxton, and then the pick will go to you, Dan.
Who in this lineup does anybody want right now? I'm going to go back to Alex Kirilloff. I just think he's a sure bet right now.
I love that I get to take Louis Miranda.
It's not his
I
name.
am not throwing away my shot.
Jose Miranda, David. Come on. I know you're such a Hamilton head. I know it's hard for you to say anything else before that, but yes, Jose Miranda.
It's all I know. It's all I know, Dan. What's in a name?
All right, David, well, it was nice to be back. It was nice to have the series off. I will go ahead and send us out. Folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Min for the Win. You can find our Min for the Win Facebook page and Instagram page as well. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on your favorite platform so you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you'd leave us a rating or a like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. The link is in the description. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Twins. That'll wrap up another episode of Min for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kuvas and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.